I grew up in the 70s. Homemade granola, Mother Earth news, free speech, and free love. Early on, I learned that I was born a precious snowflake full of unique creativity, a gift to the world whose number one job was to self-actualize. The universe existed to amuse and serve me. And work? Yeah, whatever. I wanted to put work off as long as possible. In fact, I once wrote in my journal, labor is a life-destroying activity. Following that creed, when I got married at 23, I had no job. My bride and I had to accept support from my father-in-law, and so I no longer had the luxury of saying whatever to work. But blessedly, 3 months into our subsidized marriage, my college English professor rescued me and gave me a full-time job at his newly founded language school. Suddenly, I felt a kind of self-worth and dignity that I'd never felt before. People were relying on me. I had a new sense that I was contributing to the world. I walked taller and I held my head higher. Most days, I couldn't wait to get into work. I was the first one into the office, the last one out. The 70s had lied to me. Work wasn't life-destroying. It was exciting and energizing and rewarding. And I was supporting my growing family. But then something started to happen. When I was with my family on the weekends, I started to feel restless and bored. I got cranky. I got headaches. Little things in the family started to bother me. And on our rare vacations, something at the back of my mind just wanted to get it over with and get back to the office. At the same time, even the allure of work itself started to wear thin. Sometimes it didn't feel, good to be at the office, didn't feel good to be at home. I didn't really see it myself, but my wife helpfully told me I was pretty miserable. Something was seriously out of whack. So, as a relatively new Christian, I turned to my church, people in my home group, for answers. And this is what they told me. You need work-life balance. Or, you just need to put God first, family second, and work third. Does that sound familiar? Anyone heard advice like that? So here's what I've wondered. Is work-life balance really our issue? Or is there a deeper reality in play here? What about what Paul said to the Colossians? Whatever you do, work heartily as unto the Lord. Paul's whatever, unlike my youthful, dismissive whatever, doesn't set work aside or dismiss it, but it doesn't balance it either. It doesn't put it in a tidy list with God first and then family and then work. Instead, Paul gives us a peek into a seamless life, one that weaves together all the things we do at work and at home and does them all for the Lord. Well, that's a nice dream, isn't it? But what would that really look like? It's the early 1500s. A monk named Martin Luther has a work-life problem too. The priests and monks of his day have made themselves the indispensable people of the church and the world. They didn't have to worry about work-life balance because everything they did was significant in the divine scheme of things. They were the ones who were on a mission from God. Everyone else just kind of drudged along, working in the second-class secular world. But Luther came to rebel against this two-tiered view of work. Despite threats of excommunication and even death, Luther declared, among other important things, that all work can be God's work, whether done by princes or peasants. Hear him. When a prince sees his neighbor oppressed, he should think, that concerns me. I must protect and shield my neighbor. The same is true for shoemaker, tailor, scribe, or reader. If he's a Christian tailor, he will say, I make these clothes because God has bidden me do so that I can make a living and so that I can help and serve my neighbor. When a Christian does not serve the other, God is not present. That is not Christian living. What is Luther getting at here? I think it's just this. It is through ordinary kinds of work that we love others in obedience to God. The word he used for this, and which the Christian church used for centuries, but we've cheapened to mean something like career or trade, is vocation. The Latin root vocare means calling. God is calling us to ordinary work, all kinds of work, as long as it serves our neighbor. And when Luther talked about vocation, he included what we do in our homes as well as in the marketplace. In one sermon, he said that a Christian father who is changing his son's stinky diaper sees this as privileged and honored work from God. Today, I'm sure Luther would add, caring for a mother with Alzheimer's, or shuttling our children to soccer practice, or even folding the laundry are all vocation too. Was Luther just making this up? No, Jesus is clear on this too. In Matthew 22, Jesus sums up the law by saying, love God with all your heart, your soul, and mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. Then in Matthew 25, he tells a story about his return when he's going to separate humanity as a shepherd separates the sheep and the goats. The sheep who will enjoy the Lord's presence forever are the ones who've done all the very ordinary things to love their neighbor. They've fed the hungry, they've given water to the thirsty, clothed the naked, cared for the sick. Just the kinds of things we do every day for our families, both directly and through our paychecks. The parable ends with these words from Jesus. Whatever you did for one of the least of these, my brothers and sisters, you did for me. Whatever you did. There's that word again that Paul used. Whatever you do, work heartily as unto the Lord. Of course, this whatever you did of Jesus is not the dismissive whatever I used as a young person. No, it's the lively and loving whatever of vocation. And it includes all of the things we do at work to serve customers, co-workers, even shareholders, and all the things we do on family road trips or at Boy Scout campouts or around the Thanksgiving table. So, if all of our working and all of our resting serves the same vocation of love, why do we so often feel out of balance? After God put Adam and Eve in the garden and tells them to keep it and cultivate it, they make that fateful decision to eat the fruit that God has forbidden. And pretty soon, in the cool afternoon, God comes along, and what is he doing? He's calling them. There's that word again, calling, vocation. But do Adam and Eve's hearts leap within them? Do they come running to answer that call? No, they hide. And not only do they hide from God, breaking their vocation to love him with all their being. No, these two co-workers and lovers who God made for joyous and fruitful union, they hide from each other, wearing those fig leaves that represent the shame at their nakedness. So they also break their vocation to love their neighbor, that is, each other. And we are Adam and Eve's children. At work, we hide from the hard work of fully loving that difficult co-worker. At home, we also evade the hard work of loving, hiding from our spouse with our nose in our iPad, or from our struggling teen with Netflix on the screen in front of us. Don't we? Don't I? Don't you? Hiding. We hear that call from God through Paul's words, whatever you do, work heartily as unto the Lord. But it's so tempting not to work as unto the Lord, isn't it? It's so much easier to work as unto the weekend, or work as unto the paycheck, or as unto the promotion, or as unto the rush we get from having authority or being indispensable. None of these things is bad in itself, but each of them can become a way of hiding from our vocation to love others and God in them. We won't find the answer to this problem in some magic mathematical equation of work-life balance, though it is good to prioritize our time. That's because the problem is much deeper. It's a fundamental brokenness in all the relationships of our working and resting. Of course, the rest part of our lives really is just as broken as the work part. At home with family and friends, we're still wearing those same fig leaves. All these years after Adam and Eve, we're still hiding from that hard, really impossible call to love others as ourselves and God in them. Of course, the ultimate answer to this challenge of broken loves is the wholeness that only Christ can bring. But vocational wholeness does not follow automatically. In our own churches, we're going to face at least two more barriers to a vocational life that's integrated. First, there's a temptation of super spirituality, where we revel and dwell in God's love, but fail to do works of love for our neighbor. And second, there's the temptation of activism, where we heroically, even frantically, help others, but lose sight of Christ. That's a sure road to burnout, right? So, how can we avoid these two dead ends and get back to the unified life of vocation that God intended for us? On September 3rd, AD 590, led by prominent ministers, a crowd in Rome grabbed a monk named Gregory, marched him into St. Peter's Basilica, where he underwent a forced ceremony. And on that day, the Western Church gained one of its most outstanding leaders, as Gregory the monk became Pope Gregory. But Gregory lost the life of sweet contemplation of God that was his heart's desire. The newly elevated pope was immediately swamped with the busyness of leading a complex organization and helping the poor and the sick as the last remnants of the old Roman Empire crumbled around him. Administrivia absorbed his hours, filled his thoughts, and troubled his heart. He even started to fear for his own salvation. He didn't know it at that point, but this was going to become the defining issue of his life, the question of the relationship between the contemplative life of devotion to God and the active life of service to others. After years of tortuous struggle, Gregory finally concluded that the two lives are actually inextricably intertwined. First, he saw that action prepares us for devotion. To serve our neighbor in action, we got to fight through the thorns and thistles of work in a fallen world and navigate conflicts that, reveal our own flaws and sins. And as that happens, the neediness of others and our own neediness drives us back to our first love. You might say we're flushed out of hiding and into the arms of God. At the same time, Gregory saw that to practice devotion in what we might call our Sabbath times is not just to stop working, it's to reframe our work. That can happen on Sundays, yes, but also in little moments stolen in the course of an ordinary day. It can even happen in seasons of forced rest. But as we slow down, come back into the conscious presence of God, we hit the reset button. God helps us clear away the junk and renew the vision of our true vocation. We experience his love again, and out of the overflow of that love, we can again actively love our neighbor through our work. What Gregory rediscovered was the rhythm of vocation as God had intended it. Like a slow dance, our work leads the way to a devotion, our devotion leads the way to work, and at every step, our partner, first God, then neighbor, then God, leads us out of our selfishness and into love. When Gregory put this insight into his book, The Rule of Pastoral Care, it hit his world like a thunderclap. The church gave that book to every bishop upon his consecration for the next 1,000 years. But sadly, as we've seen, by the time Luther came along, Christians were forgetting again Gregory's insight of a unified vocation of action and devotion, and going back to the two-tiered system of blessed monastics and struggling seculars. And Luther had to teach all over again that ordinary work is an honored part of our vocations to love. Now I wonder, are we back in the same rut? Yes, here and there in seminary classrooms, Luther's doctrine of vocation and Gregory's pastoral rule are still being taught. But so many of us still seem to be missing the memo. We miss it when we start resenting our work and idolizing our times of rest and worship, using them to hide out from the call back to neighbor-loving work. And we miss it And maybe this is the stronger temptation for many of us, when we let our work become an idol, an all-consuming flurry of activity where we hide out from God. But it doesn't have to be that way. Even in my own life, I've begun to live in the reality of this seamless vocation with its rhythm of God love and neighbor love. Of course, I still blow it often, but by God's grace, I think I've come a long way from the whatever of my young self and the workaholism that followed it. Now in my 50s, I'm finally really hearing and acting on the whatever you did of Jesus, the whatever you do of Paul. I'm hearing Luther's call to love my neighbor through ordinary work and Gregory's call to let my devotion prepare me for my work and my work prepare me for my devotion. Can you hear it too?